At the pelvis level, there are three main postural deviations to be aware of: the anterior pelvic tilt, the posterior pelvic tilt, and the lateral pelvic tilt. Both the anterior and posterior tilt can be observed from side on, whereas the lateral pelvic tilt can be observed both posteriorly and anteriorly. Pelvic stability is of the utmost importance as it is one of the key foundational areas of the body. It links the upper body with the lower body and is essential in the production and transfer of force. Typically speaking, poor pelvis control will cause damage either higher up the chain or lower down the chain. And as such, a PT must be able to identify any potential abnormalities in this area and how to correct it. Excessive anterior pelvic tilt is the term used to describe a forward tilt of the pelvis. Posterior tilt is the term used to describe a backwards tilt of the pelvis. In order to help you understand, I want you to sit up nice and tall on your chair and put your hands on your hips. Now where your hands are, imagine this is the top of a bucket, with the part touching the seat as the bottom of a bucket. Your fingers, which are towards the anterior portion of your pelvis, represent the ASIS, and your thumbs, which are on the posterior side of the pelvis, represent the PSIS. Now imagine this bucket is full of water. If you wanted to pour water out of the front of the bucket, which way would you need to tilt your bucket? Go ahead and try this. Ideally, you've answered to the front. So as I'm saying this, keep doing the action and pay attention to what happens to the relationship between your fingers and your thumbs. As the water is tipped out the front, you will feel your fingers move forward and downward with a respective lifting of the thumbs. Did you also notice that as you did this, your erector muscles contracted? This is an anterior pelvic tilt. In an anterior pelvic tilt, the muscles that are likely to be tight anteriorly are the hip flexors, such as the iliopsoas and the rectus femoris, and posteriorly, the erector spinae group. Since the pelvis relies on the balance between anterior, lateral, and posterior muscles, it can be said that if there are some tight muscles pulling it into a tilt, then there must be some corresponding weak muscles that are allowing it to happen. In this scenario, it is common for the rectus abdominis on the anterior and the gluteus maximus on the posterior to be weakened. An anterior pelvic tilt will often cause excessive lumbar lordosis. So the question that you need to ask yourself is this: what do I need to do to help this? And again, here's the golden rule: lengthen what is tight and strengthen what is weak. So in this case, you'd want to stretch the hip flexors and lumbar erectors and strengthen the rectus abdominis and the glutes. A posterior pelvic tilt is the opposite. Place your hands on your hips again, and this time try and tip the water out the back of the bucket. Again, pay attention to the relationship between your fingers and your thumbs. In this scenario, as you are tipping the water out, you should notice that your fingers move upwardly, whereas your thumbs move down and posteriorly. Also, as you do this, what muscles feel like they are contracting? You should feel your hamstrings tighten and the rectus abdominis tighten. So in a posterior tilt, the muscles which are tight and thus pulling the pelvis into position are the hamstrings and the rectus abdominis. These will need stretching and releasing. And the muscles that are lengthened and weak are the hip flexors and the erector spinal group. So these will need strengthening. You will also typically see that a person with a posterior tilt will also have an associated flat back in the lumbar region. Lastly, there is a lateral pelvic tilt, and this can be seen from either the posterior or the anterior view. In a lateral tilt, it looks as if the hip is dropped or collapsed on one side. And on the other side, the PSIS and the ASIS will appear higher. The side that is elevated is considered to be the side with the pelvic tilt. So if the right side is dropped, which means the left SIS and the PSIS is higher, then we say that they have a pelvic tilt to the left. A leg length difference or poor control of the hip stabilizers, in particular glute med and the hip adductors, can cause this postural abnormality. This postural observation can also be confirmed when conducting the stalk test.